Entropy. It's the natural order of things falling apart, systems unraveling, defenses weakening, chaos creeping in. In cybersecurity, we don't fight entropy, we chase after it. I am Dave Lewis, Global Advisory CISO here at 1Password, and this is the Chasing Entropy podcast, where we peel back the layers of our digital lives to reveal the human decisions, systemic cracks, and overlooked patterns that put everything at risk. From boardrooms to breach reports, 0 days to zero trust, yes, I said it. We're chasing the questions that keep security leaders up at night and the stories that don't necessarily make the headlines. No hype, no FUD, just real talk with the minds shaping the front lines of cybersecurity. Thank you for joining us. And today we have Allison Miller. Allison, thank you so much for being here. And could you tell us a little bit about who you are for the listeners?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Exciting to be aboard the Entropy ship. My name is Allison Miller. I have been in cybersecurity for a couple of decades, moving back and forth actually between what I would call enterprise cybersecurity and anti fraud, anti abuse, or sort of advanced product risk type issues. And I've had a chance to look at these problems from a lot of different perspectives. I've worked for banks and financial services enterprises that are fairly traditional and highly regulated. And also, I've worked for a lot of social startups or gaming companies that are cloud native and um, sort of making space along the entropy boundary and pushing the envelope in those ways. So
Very good.
after, yeah, and after a lot of years of sort of doing that in different types of roles and in banking and online platforms and services, I've been doing some independent consulting and research at the intersection of fraud and cybersecurity since I decided had bounced around between the two enough that maybe I could find some space at the intersection. And that's where I've been.
Very cool. So I always have to ask guests when I have them on is, where they got their start. Like I remember I started off rather nefariously, duping video games and selling them to kids in school back in the 80s. And I've talked to other people that have, started out CompuServe or various other things like that. Or no, Computer City. Anyway, something along those lines, like Radio Shack type idea. How did you get started in this field, and why did you not run away screaming like the rest of us should have?
Hmm. Oh, the end of the beginning or the beginning of the beginning? I think I was really interested in communication networks. I was always a network person. I figured out you could do some interesting things with payphones back when there were payphones. Um, and and so when the internet kind of came about, I wasn't really interested in technology for technology's sake. I was interested in technology for how I could communicate and connect with others. And while I was at university, is when I realized through some personal experiences, but also just sort of observing what was happening, I realized that people could do some not so great things with the technology, and that those not so great things might be in the pursuit of not just information, but money. And so then I got very interested in financial networks and digital exchange and commerce and you know before cryptocurrency was a thing, there were other types of cyber cash and things. So I was very interested in um, the connections between things and the implications of that on commerce and money as well as communications.
Very good. So I can see that logical flow going there. Was there any sort of pivotal moment along the way or specific roles that you had that really shaped your approach when it comes to digital security in general?
I think I think that some of the things that shaped I think some of the things that shaped my journey had to do with, just when you're sort of fooling around online and IRC and news groups and chat rooms, the sort of natural sniping. And then I had a few situations where sort of what maybe could have been, harmless online banter um, ended up showing up in the physical world, which was sort of unnerving. That is also around the time that there was a lot of cybercrime making headlines. It was still sort of early days, but those types of hijinks also kind of caught my eye, and I just already had a natural inclination for not just how do things work, but how will they likely break. And so I just started doing independent research into some of these topics, and that was the shaping mechanism. I wouldn't say that there was a certain moment like, the moment I realized I could make free phone calls with a paperclip and a payphone. I'm not sure that those were shaping, although, there's little warm spots in my heart for some of those memories. But I think it was more just watching things evolve and trying to understand where they might go was really exciting.
Nice. So you never did the quarter on a string thing?
No, I never did a quarter on a string thing. Yeah, and the paperclip discovery was, I still can't believe that that worked.
Hmm.
But it
Crazy, isn't it?
worked. Yeah, yeah. Just extremely. I wonder what would fit in that, and if I poked when I was anyway. Okay, that sounds weird. You may.
But that's actually the fundamental crux of how we all got started is, looking at systems and poking in things and see how they worked and breaking them. And
Yes,
it really is an amazing thing, because in security we're always, trying to tear things apart, but on the same token we end up wearing many hats as we've evolved, because when we got started, back when the world was flat, it was very different. They didn't have master's degrees in information security and things like that. And along the way, you've actually had different personas per se as well, too. How
I
would
sure
people
have.
know you? Yeah, like back on that platform that used to be social media that we will never longer speak of. You had a different name there, didn't you?
I sure did. So I think all of us had, like, throwaway usernames. So the handle Selena Kyle is something that I'd used on different email, sort of like semi-anonymous, like email type accounts I created in IRC, and then Twitter. Um, and that was funny because when I first joined Twitter, and it's my handle on a lot of platforms, but when I first joined Twitter, I didn't really know what I was going to use it for. I just posted band pics and maybe like pics of fancy coffee, and it was the days where you would refresh and see what your 7 friends had said in the last week versus what it, towards the tail end of my time on the platform, it would be, your feed would be streaming like a stock ticker, just like so it became so of them. It went from being asynchronous to something that was like too synchronous
Mm,
in a lot of ways.
interesting.
But yeah, yeah, I was Selena Kyle. That is also the name that I would introduce myself as when I was undercover at DEF CON, trying to be pseudonymous. Um, and the funny thing then, of course, is that a lot of the other people's alter egos who I met on Twitter, I ended up meeting in real life. And it was very confusing for some people. They just know me as Selena, and so they
Mhm.
think that that is my name, and they get very confused. And then they're like, "Oh yeah, right, that's your real name."
So
Um,
for those of us who may not be comic book fans, what is the reference?
Yes, that's the other thing. Not everybody gets the comic book reference. So Selena Kyle is um, Catwoman's alter ego, and uh, and some people find that delightful. That that someone who spent a lot of time in not just cyber but fraud has named themselves after a cat burglar, and some folks just think my name is Selena.
It works on many levels.
Yes, yes,
So, like with all the different roles you've had along the way, you've had, the big, the big jobs that people are always aspiring to.
yes.
And as part of that, you've, developed a very keen interest around fraud and things to that effect. Um, what would you say is the real driving force as to why fraud fascinates you so much? Um, yeah.
S- Well, I think it goes back to some of my early technical interests, which were around networks. And the thing that I liked about networks was not just like the graph of connections, but that networks represented data in motion, data in
Mhm.
motion, and financial networks and e-commerce represent sort of information in motion that's money in motion, and the way money moves is very interesting. I didn't just study technology and information systems in university. I also studied finance and economics. So
I
so
f-
I just think that like payment systems I really groove on how they work, and I understand how they work after having spent time working at places like Visa and PayPal. I understand how those networks work at a really fundamental level, right? Like I
Mhm.
used to decode TCP/IP traffic, and I could read that and read the flags. There was a time I could like kind of read hex or what have you, but now that kind of understanding of what I'm looking at is true for financial transactions, and so
Mhm.
and so so I find fraud fascinating because that's cybersecurity. It's how it goes wrong, and that's kind of
Mhm.
what my cybersecurity spidey senses are around, like how things can go wrong. Um, and what I also love about fraud and anti-abuse systems is that to a certain extent, it's how things can go wrong even if the code is right.
Yes.
Right. So it's not necessarily a software vulnerability. It's not a hole in or a gap exactly, because the system is working as intended. It's just the participants are misbehaving in a way that they're allowed to do with the application working as designed. And the reason why cyber and fraud and anti-abuse have sort of blended together for me is whatever system I'm working on, the behavior that gets attacked, or the where the misbehavior tends to happen, is around the value of the system, which is why
Mhm.
email systems and social networks have spam, because that the value is the communication, so the communication is what gets abused. And then with financial systems or payment systems, that is with the money movement, and then also with any online platform that has a login,
Mhm.
the login process, that sort of authentication and then authorization to do things, that's led from the identity is what gets abused, right? So
Mhm.
there's these sort of where the value is where it gets complex. And your podcast is about chasing entropy. I think chased risk and complexity and scale, because all those things kind of go together. So that's where my attention gets drawn. Where is it gnarly and difficult?
So when you're talking about risk, complexity, and scale, that really leads me into the conversation that is on top of everybody's mind of artificial intelligence.
Sure.
And let's look at it through the lens of the CISO. Now, the risks that are involved, where things can go wrong, or as they charmingly refer to it as hallucinations, it's not exactly fraud fraud per se, but it has similar impact when things go wrong. And then conversely, you have the attackers flipping on his head and using LLMs such as Fraud GPT. I don't know if you're familiar with that particular
Hmm.
platform, where the attackers are able to use that. Um, Artificial intelligence really is a hammer that just of a different color. And that's one of the things that I always get a kick out of, where people assign or attribute this, lofty ambitions towards what it is. It's just a, scripting on steroids in a lot of ways. But the risk is real, especially when you look at it in terms of scale. How do you think this is going to play out over the coming years when the CISO role has been under the microscope for the last couple of years from a jurisprudence aspect? Do you think this is going to have a significant impact on that role going forward?
Well, um, speaking of complexity, I think that was a couple of different questions.
Hmm.
But let's start with AI as a hammer. So, yeah, I think AI is a hammer, except when it's a rubber chicken being used as a hammer, meaning that um, my my cyber nerdiness is around detection technologies. Is the detection technologies, it's detection that I'm using in fraud detection. It's a detection set of techniques that I'm using in anti-abuse detection. And so detection and prevention are kind of married, but I've been spending a lot of time on the detection side for a very long time, which is all a data game. And so, even early in my career, I was using machine learning techniques or, data, or let's get simpler, data analytics
Mhm.
to understand patterns, right? And as the technology has improved and our ability to sort of manage data problems at scale has improved, we've gone from statistical methods to machine learnings to AI. And so, in many ways, I'm pro AI because
Mhm.
I'm pro machine learning. I'm also still pro statistics because they're all drill bits. I don't know. I want to use the hammer analogy a little bit more, but like you got to pick the right drill bit for what you're doing, right? So in some situations, I still think that it makes sense to use statistical methods in production, even if you have used ML or AI to benchmark the performance of your very predictable, very explainable statistical model, and or use the machine learning or the AI to help you investigate your own data, investigate your own problem set, right? So so
Yeah.
so the first thing I guess I would say is, yeah, AI is coming, AI is everywhere. How did we find some of these use cases that folks are applying them to? And I also feel like when it comes to cybersecurity, we're going to use it in detection because we've
Mhm.
always used these types of techniques or capabilities in detection. We're also going to use them in investigation to make sense of what we're looking at. Because even in the case, like if you are using AI as your little co-pilot buddy to help you make sense of a very big and gnarly data set, then
Mhm.
even if it hallucinates, you're there to back it up. It's just there to help you speed things up a little bit. And
Yeah.
then the last place where we're going to be using AI and cyber, well, not the last place. Okay, I have three categories that I'm most interested in. The last one is also a classic place where we've used things like machine learning and such, which is in automation, in
Mhm.
automating things in the SOC, of course, which again goes to that maybe assisting with investigations, but also just, speeding up routine actions that right now we just don't have the people to do manually.
Right.
Okay. So then you sort of the that's how I sort of see a lot of CISOs looking at AI. They're trying to figure out how they can take advantage of it. They are, of course, often, but not in every organization, being asked to provide the governance guardrails. And when I say I'm not sure that's true in every organization, because banks have been having to do model risk management for a while now, which I is when I first started working with modeling techniques, that was not is sort of a different set of concerns, but sort of model risk management has needed to expand into these new types of algorithms and AI in places like financial institutions. And I think other industries are kind of borrowing from that idea that if you're leveraging these very sophisticated technologies to automate things that had previously required human oversight, then there's a lot of legwork that you need to do to govern that.
Mm-hmm.
So your last question was, so how is this changing the role of the CISO, essentially? Is that right?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So I think and that is a question that if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I was still questioning whether the CISO, it was right to put that on the CISO,
Mm-hmm.
because the CISOs are not necessarily the ones who have been most up close and personal with these things. And when you don't necessarily have data scientists or AI experts in your shop to govern the use of what data scientists and AI is happening in product, which is
Mm-hmm.
usually staff. If they're going to take advantage of it in their product, then they're really staff for it. Um, so I think though that now that we're all on our AI journeys, I think that most CISOs, I think, are partnering with the folks who are the early and aggressive adopters and approaching it the way that maybe in the past they'd approached AppSec, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
AppSec is growing forward. AppSec has grown past just scanning for vulns and patching the
Yeah.
vulns to more product risk, meaning product security, meaning understand how the code is operating, not just in the does it have gaps or not, but in the context of where it's deployed. And then I think
Mm-hmm.
we're also moving into product risk, which incorporates some of those like anti-abuse or anti-fraud ideas, which is what's the overall technology risk or product risk of this new feature product suite. And I just feel like a lot of the AI governance and AI, see, I'm pausing here because I'm still not sure
Mm-hmm.
whether to call it security or safety. Let's say
Mm.
AI security can be folded into a modern product risk program. And I still think that we have questions around who is ultimately responsible for AI safety in an enterprise. And that is maybe not always the CISO, but if it's not the CISO should know who it is. I guess that's what I'd say.
That's a very fair point. And when we're looking at product risk and we look at AI, but going beyond the generative AI, which seems to dominate most of the conversations, looking at something like agentic AI, where you have these agents deployed within your environment that are making autonomous decisions for you based on a certain set of criteria, do they not present a risk in of themselves because they are not necessarily deployed with security in mind? So they're very good at what they're very good at, but security is
Yes.
not always factored in there. So do you see that as a risk that could come back to haunt us, much in the same as we saw with WannaCry and a 10-year-old vulnerability?
I believe that so as we're talking about agentic systems, so I love agentic systems
Mm-hmm.
because that gets back to sort of the reliability. Like when I deploy a model, I want it to be I want the model's behaviors to be predictable, right? So
Yeah.
it almost sounds redundant because obviously it's a model, it's trying to predict, but that's why I like statistical models because their behavior is predictable. And I feel like the more you scope down what it is that you're asking an agent or an AI or some type of model to do, the more you're scoping it down, the more precise you can get. The more predictable the performance and the behavior of that agent is going to be. So I love that. However, I also know that when you combine simple systems, you get complexity. like by nature. I did it's sort of funny because as you were talking about this, I was thinking about this presentation that I did 100 years ago called something like when machine learning is our co-pilot or something like that, which wow, now thinking about that, like wow, that really was before its time. But there was this video of these, I think they were like machines or robots, and robotic, not like robots like take me to your leader. I guess robots didn't say that, aliens did. But
Wouldn't that? Yeah, that'd be
um,
the aliens. Yeah.
when you put a bunch of really simple things together, they start to behave in such complex ways that they edge upon chaos.
Mhm.
So, rolling back, I like agentic systems. I think that they provide us a better shot at explainability, predictability of performance and behaviors of each component. But that is the difference too, I think, between application security and product risk, which
Mhm.
is that the risk of the system is not based upon the predictability of one thing. It then you the agentic chain, if you will, you need to be monitoring that as well. So you need to be monitoring the behaviors um, and the performance of each individual actor, if you will, and the
Yep.
system in a more holistic way. And just based on what we know about nature, we know that yeah, simple things are simple, but when you start allowing simple things to interact with each other, that's how you get social systems. that's how you get, and that's how you get complexity verging on chaos.
Well, in the light of the conversation about chaos and when we factor in AI and security, putting simple things together, where do you see the roles of trust and security evolve over the next decade?
That's very funny that either AI or security is simple, but how do I see them evolving? Well, I kind of feel like I still I'm feeling a lot of cloud energy. I'm feeling a lot of mobile device energy, which is these are technologies that like there may be other technologies that maybe they created bubbles of vibes and then burst. Maybe they're rebubbling now, some of these technologies we could think of in the past few years, but mobile and cloud, I think, maybe Wi-Fi, to be honest, too. But these are technologies that I think we we were able to predict their adoption, but they made us all very nervous
Yeah.
when we realized we were going to have to get our arms around them, and when we realized that fundamentally they kind of changed our um, either our visibility into problems or our ability to directly manage them. You think about organizations that really struggle to go from on-prem to cloud, or and now are considering multi-cloud. um, uh, so I get that sense, and
Mhm.
what I mean about that is, yeah, it's going to be difficult and complicated, and the CISO is going to probably have to expand their remit in a couple unexpected directions, and also those technologies have empowered security.
Mhm.
So it's just like any hammer or rubber chicken. It's useful or problematic depending on the situation. So any tool can be used in multiple ways, I guess. So
Very
that's
cool.
that's that's kind of what I think. I think that the CISOs teams are going to need to advance their skills um, to kind of keep up with this, and also I believe in innovation. So I believe that we have commercially motivated, but also just philosophically motivated folks who are going to try and figure out how can we use this to help us, how can we
Mhm.
use this to make security easier? And you see some spots where folks are already adapting and adopting on show floors and in innovation competitions. And I think that that's going to continue. So congratulations, CISOs, fellow CISOs, former CISOs, future CISOs. You too are chasing complexity.
Excellent. So that's great advice and guidance for CISOs. But one thing I always like to bring up is with all my guests is what is the one piece of advice you wish you got when you first got into this field for people that are coming up? Because I often get asked this question is like, how do I get to where you are in your career? And I always tell them the same thing. It's like you will never have the same trajectory as any other person, but there are nuggets that we can share. It's often people feel like when they get into the field at first, it's like they're in a roller derby kind of situation. So what would you share there?
I see what you did there with the roller derby reference. Well, hold on a sec. Let me see if I can find a roller derby, a roller derby analogy to throw back at you. I guess so. So the advice that I like to give folks who are starting their careers, or advice that I maybe wish I had given myself or something like that, is to follow your curiosity. So I find folks who they want to pursue a career in an industry, and it's because they're interested in the industry. Like, okay, but you have to follow something into that industry. And maybe it's something that there's not a lot of information out there on. Like, you can't just chat GPT your way into it. um you can't just Google it. And but it fascinates you. uh and so following one's curiosity is really my biggest piece of advice. And how that showed up for me is the first 10 years of my career, people just thought my resume was weird. I actually got a job because I said, "Oh, I was surprised that you called me back." And they were like, "Well, you weren't qualified for the role that you applied for, but your resume was so strange. It was so weird. We just wanted to meet you." And that company ended up making a role for me. And it ended up being
Oh,
one of the foundational roles in my career. So I think that there's something to that. It doesn't all have to make sense at the beginning, because it's just there's so much opportunity. There's so many
mhm.
directions that you could go in. I think, though, that it's really important to focus on something interesting versus maybe or something that interests you, I guess I should say, because job descriptions don't have any life to them, but your
Yeah.
interests do. And you can bring your interests into almost any job description. And then you start to you're able to start to kind of map out the world and the opportunities around you, because you'll have the context of this thing that you're amazing at. I've heard other folks answer this question on maybe your podcast and others with things like, start writing, start talking to people about the things that you're interested in. And I think that that's true. And that helped me to network. But for me, it was less about the networking and more about there's this thing I just need to talk to people about. And and to express myself and to learn from people through conversation. That was
Mhm.
really important. So be
Very
Alice in
cool.
Wonderland, find that white rabbit, follow it down the rabbit hole.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here this week. I really do appreciate you joining me on the podcast. And I'd like to say thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. And be sure to check us out every week here on the Chasing Entropy podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe and all that sort of fun stuff. Allison Miller, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you,
Thank you,
everyone, for
Dave.
listening. Cheers.